The liver arch file that I said earlier on is marked Exhibit HH2 and Exhibit HH1 and Exhibit HH2, which I said contains in part the statement of Mr. Jankelson, Mr. Roy Jankelson, and annexures to the statement, as well as the statement of Mr. Albertus Johannes Venter, and annexures now only has the statement of Mr. Roy Jankelson, and annexures. The statement and annexures relating to Mr. Albertus Johannes Venter are now in a separate file marked Exhibit WH2.
Thank you,
Okay,
Chairman.
thank you.
The next one, Chairman, is the Public Protector's report. There is now a reports file, so it's marked HH reports. It's a distinct file on its own.
Yes. I don't have that one, or is it somewhere there?
Chairman, I'm being advised
Oh,
that it is there.
Yeah, there is a separate file marked Exhibit WH and written reports. That's the file which has got, among others, a report by the Public Protector. Or is it
Correct.
only Public Reporter reports?
At this point in time, Chairman, we are likely to add to it as more witnesses come
okay.
forward.
I see there's another one. There's also another liver arch file marked Exhibit WH and written media bundle.
Correct, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you.
Then last, Chairman, the presentation that we would like to make just as we close, not right now, we have printed those pictures. Might I suggest, Chairman, that we simply put that into the reference bundle, right at the back of the reference bundle, or would you prefer it to be in a completely different bundle?
I think we could put it at the end of some bundle, but I know you showed it to me, but it's not on my desk, and that may be because I didn't give it to anybody to put it on my desk. Thank you. Thank you. Do you suggest that we put this at the back of?
The reference bundle, Chairman.
reference
They're rather
bundle.
large. We've got A, B, and C of the reference bundle.
Yes. Okay, yeah. So that can be put there once we have used it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chairman, to go back to where we were earlier on, Mr. Jankelson, you were really dealing, just before we broke for lunch, with the culture of fear in the Free State and reservations people have, the reporting you had undertaken in respect of what the former Premier had indicated at a meeting, etc. What I did want to bring to your attention, and really it's more for the record than anything else, in the media bundle I had asked you to find, I trust you have it now. If you go to page 29 of the media bundle, there you'll find an article relating to Moses Chake. I was simply wanting you to have a very quick look at it and confirm that this is the incident you referred to in relation to what happened to Moses Chake and the fact that it seems to be one of those investigations that's incomplete.
That is correct, Chairperson. It's the same person to whom I referred previously.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Mr. Jankelson, I then want to go back to your statement and look at specific paragraphs that I have glossed over, just in an effort to satisfy you that all the evidence you wanted to bring to the attention of the chairman is in fact on record. If we could start at your paragraph 18.3, which is on page 4, which also speaks to Annexure RJ7. You will find Annexure RJ7 on page 169, page 168, I beg your pardon, 168. If we just start with what you say at 18.3, Mr. Jankelson. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
If you could then just speak to the issue you raise at 18.3 of your affidavit.
Chairperson, what I was referring here is to the Public Protector's report, and specifically where she indicated on 24 June 2014, the Acting Accountant General informed that the provisional report was submitted to the Premier of the Free State for comment. What I was indicating in my affidavit is that the Premier must have been aware of the various irregularities and malfeasance that the Accountant General indicated were taking place in the Free State, that in spite of that, they continued to appropriate funds to the project, and in fact, as far as I'm concerned, ignored the findings and recommendations of the Treasury report.
Mr. Jankelson, so you've just been looking at your paragraph 18.31. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Well, I see 18.3, but not 18.3.1.
He misheard me, Chairman, so I'm going to
Oh.
take him back to where I wanted him to be.
Okay.
We will come back to 18.31 at a later stage. Mr.
Okay.
Jankelson, can we go to page 4 of the paginated papers? So the top right-hand number, 004.
If you'll bear with me, Chairperson, I just have to
Yes, let's make sure
find
you've
this
got
amongst all the documents.
that you have got the file that she's talking about is the file that has got your statement.
And then it's page 4 of your sworn affidavit. I then asked you to look at paragraph 18.3, where you make some observations. And at the end of the observation, you refer the chairman to Annexure RJ7. And it really goes to whether Paras was or was not involved in Esteana, Mr. Jankelson. Do you
Chair-
want to speak to the issue, just to put your views on record?
For the record, Chairperson, what I was referring to in this specific reference is that the presentations made by Esteana to the provincial government and then by the department to the Executive Council indicated that Esteana had the support of a large dairy company called Paras in India, and that in the specific article that I referred to in RJ17, that the article indicates that the investigator who wrote the article indicated that they contacted Paras, who said that they were not involved in the project at all. And they might have or might not have been, I don't have the specific information on that. But in all my interactions, in the replies that I received from the MECs, which are part of my bundle, in the reports that the committee received, there was only mention of Esteana, and Paris wasn't mentioned in those reports. And I would have thought that this is a very important aspect of the project, that they have the expertise from Paris, because we know that Esteana is an IT company. It's not a dairy company, and they would require the support of Paris in order to initiate and run a dairy farm. But in all my interactions, both in my visits to the farm and the information that we received from the provincial government, there was no further reference to Paris.
So,
I'm not aware if Paris was in fact or wasn't involved in the project, except based on the information from this media article and my personal interaction.
if I look at page 169 of the paginated papers, which is the article that you have annexed, there's RJ7, bullet point 2 notes that the department did no due diligence on Esteana or its claimed partnership with Paras, a major dairy company in India. Paras subsequently denied any involvement. That's the point you're making,
Yes.
amongst others. Thank you. I just wanted us to be able to cover any little bits that you had not had time to testify to. Can we then just deal with paragraph 18.7 and just your broad references to the CFO? Is there anything in particular that you'd like to bring to the attention of the chairman in relation to the manner in which the CFO discharged her duties?
Chairperson, the National Treasury report did indicate that some of the mismanagement and the misdemeanors took place as a result of the actions of the head of department and the CFO, and both of them should be subjected to disciplinary action. But in a transcription of the Accountant General report, the CFO also substantiated many of the issues which I've raised here regarding Mauma Mabung and various other issues. So it is there for the record.
Also in paragraph 18.7, you mentioned that Mr. Beatrice Venter is the official, the legal advisor, who drafted the agreement between Esteana and the department. Are you there? So it's your paragraph 18.7 that I'm looking at, Mr. Jankelson.
I do have a chairperson.
I don't know if you'd like to just speak to that point as well.
Yes, chairperson. Besides the fact that the Accountant General report, the National Treasury report, was submitted to the Office of the Premier, and he must have been aware of what was taking place there and then continued to appropriate funds to it. We also confirmed with Mr. Bertus Venter in committee in the legislature that the contract was drafted in the Office of the Premier, and that is the contract between Esteana and the Department of Agriculture.
But the reason
I'm sorry, do you know by any chance whether the Department of Agriculture had its own legal advisors who could have drafted the agreement rather than it being drafted in the Office of the Premier when it was an agreement relating to the Department of Agriculture?
Chairperson, I'm not aware that individual departments had someone who might have been capable of drafting such an agreement. I know that some departments do have legal advisors to assist the MECs, but I'm of the view, and my assumption is that larger contracts of this nature would be drafted in the Office of the Premier, whose job it is to do oversight and monitor all the activities of other departments. And this is a very important contract. It was in fact a flagship of the province, which was noteworthy enough to be mentioned in the State of the Province address of the Premier. So I presume there should have been substantial interest from the Premier's office in this project.
Well, the mere fact, if the position is that, for example, provincial departments did not have legal advisors of their own, and they all made use of legal advisors in the office of the Premier whenever a need arose, it would cast a certain picture to this situation. But if the position is that each department has got its own legal advisors, but an agreement that related to a particular department which had its own legal advisors was actually drafted in the office of the Premier, it may, and I put it no higher than that, it may cast a certain picture. But it may be that agreements that are not complex are dealt with by legal advisors in different departments, but when it comes to complex agreements, maybe they are taken to the legal advisors in the office of the Premier, because those legal advisors maybe are much more experienced legal advisors. I just wanted to check whether you know anything about whether government departments have their own legal advisors. But you say you are not sure whether every department has its own legal advisor.
Chairperson, being a flagship project, I would think that it would be drafted in the office of the Premier, but I think that the next witness, Mr. Bertus Ventu, is that person in the Premier's office, would be better able to reply to that.
Thank you very much.
Save that, Mr. Jankelson. In paragraph 18.6, you explain the centralization of certain functions. If you could just link what you say in 18.6 to the answer you've just given to the chairman.
Chairperson, what I'm saying here is that, as I mentioned previously, that the departments may have their legal advisors, but that the important aspects regarding to legal matters are centralized in the office of the Premier.
Yes.
And that is how I understand the provincial government to function.
Yes, okay.
And they have been so centralized since about 2010, more or less.
I cannot give an exact date for that, Chairperson.
Okay.
The next point, Mr. Jankelson, arises on page 8 at paragraph 18.23. Now, at paragraph 18.23, you really complain in the very last sentence. You summarize your complaint, and that is the complicity of MECs and possibly the Premier. I'll point you to one or two other paragraphs where you say they really have failed to take responsibility for what happened at Vrede, at the Vrede Dairy Farm. Maybe it's just convenient to give you all of the paragraphs that deal with this complicity issue that you address. So it would be 18.23, 18.27, 18.34, 18.38, 18.30, I beg your pardon, 18.50, and 18.51. The central point you make there is senior people in government appear to refuse to want to take responsibility when things go wrong. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to the comments you've made during your evidence.
Chairperson, I think my comments are quite clear, that senior people in government knew what was happening at Vrede. They cannot deny that they knew what was taking place there. In spite of that, they continued to appropriate provincial government funding to that project and still do so today.
Then if I ask you to look at paragraph 18.41, which
I'm sorry. When you say they continue to allocate funding to the project up to now in circumstances where the agreement with Esteana was cancelled some years back. Do you know why there would be funding being allocated nevertheless, despite the cancellation? Or is the position that the department is obligated in some way to spend some money because there are cattle there and so on, or what is the position?
Chairperson, after the withdrawal of Esteana, as I mentioned previously, the project was handed over to the FTC, who then appointed a company, Echu, to do the physical work on the ground. And there are cattle there that need to be milked. So I presume that they continue to allocate funding, firstly, to ensure that the project was not in vain, that those existing cattle are still being milked. But secondly, if they were to shut down the project, it would be a huge acknowledgement that the project has failed. And I don't think the government wants to acknowledge by closing down the project that it has failed. And there's no way, I think, at this stage that the project can continue, probably without that additional funding, because the cattle that are there are already aged, because they didn't do the necessary management of the dairy cows, and they're not producing enough milk to ensure that they even pay for their own feed, those cattle. And that's information we received on our visits to the farm itself.
Okay, thank you.
I then had taken you to the incident where MEC Zwane, as he then was, refused to respond to questions you raised in the House, and the Speaker didn't come to your assistance. I don't know if you want to take that any further.
Chairperson, just in terms of the MEC and the Premier's responses when we raised the issues of Vrede project. The former MEC, Mamiki Kabati, in one of the committees refused to answer questions relating to the Vrede dairy project. She was protected by the chairperson of the committee at that time. In another instance, when the former MEC, Mamiki Kabati of Agriculture, became Speaker, the then MEC Zwane, because as I mentioned, they play musical chairs. You know, one day it's this person and the next day the next person. When MEC Zwane was MEC, he also, during a sitting of the legislature, refused to reply to questions. He said he's already answered them. We hadn't received the replies to those questions. And I then wrote to the then Speaker, Kabate, to ask her if she would use her position as the presiding officer to force him to reply to those questions. And I never ever received a reply from her office relating to that. In other instances, when I raised the issue of the Vrede Dairy project in debates, the MECs and the Premier opted rather to use personal insults against myself and my colleagues in opposition, rather than deal with the substantive issues that we raised during our debates, and that continues to take place up until now.
Well, what you are raising, Mr. Jankelson, is a very important issue for this commission. I have said in the past, in the hearings and in media briefings of this commission, that if at the end of the work of this commission, I find that there was state capture in this country, one of the things I will have to look at is what made state capture possible. What facilitated state capture? What environment made it possible? what structures and what bodies provided for in our constitutional dispensation, in our legal systems, failed to do their job, which if they had done, maybe state capture would not have happened at all, or could have been arrested before it went too far. And one of the areas I'm interested in is how the national parliament and provincial legislatures performed their oversight constitutional obligations during the relevant times. And what I say about state capture applies to corruption, even if it's corruption that doesn't fall under state capture. How are portfolio committees in the National Assembly and in the National Parliament and in provincial legislatures performing their oversight obligations? When they become aware of wrongdoing, of corruption within the executive, within government, what do they do? Do they do their job the way they are supposed to do it? Do some members of parliament in certain portfolio committees not perform their constitutional obligations properly because their party, the party from which they come, is the same party that is in the executive? If it is so, what is it that needs to be changed in our constitutional arrangements to make sure that in the future we won't have state capture again? We won't have corruption reaching the levels that it has reached in this country. So I'm very interested in getting information as to how in the national parliament and in provincial legislatures, members of parliament and members of the legislature of all parties, including members of parliament and members of the legislature who belong to the party that dominates the executive, provincial executive, how do they perform their functions of oversight? Mr. Bloom, Dennis Bloom, gave evidence before me and said, earlier this year, and said, when he was still a member of the ANC in the National Assembly at some stage in the past, and he was a member of the Portfolio Committee on Correctional Services, when he raised certain issues with regard to the minister responsible for correctional services, issues of corruption, he said his chief whip, if I understood him correctly, called him and said something to the effect like, take it easy, you are not an opposition party member. This is our own minister. Is that the right thing? Is that kind of attitude the right attitude for a party to tell a member of parliament? Or is the position that a member of parliament, irrespective of what party they come from, if they they perform their constitutional obligations of oversight, they are supposed to perform that without fear from their own parties, and their parties should not instruct them not to do their job the way they should do their job? I'm interested in all of those things, and I'm interested in the experiences of people who have been in such portfolio committees, whether in the national parliament or in provincial legislatures, to say this is what happens. Because it may well be that if those people, if members of parliament and members of provincial legislatures performed their constitutional obligations of oversight vigorously, without fear that maybe if they perform those duties vigorously, they will be victimized by their own parties, and so on. It may well be that the levels of corruption in the country wouldn't be where they are, and that it may well be that if state capture did take place in South Africa, maybe it would not have taken place, or it would have been stopped at an early stage. So I am interested in evidence relating to that, and I would be grateful if you are able to go back and look at the debates in the provincial legislature or in relevant committees where some such issues were raised, and the manner in which certain members of parliament dealt with them is not the way they should have dealt with them, and as a result, oversight was defeated. Okay, you understand?
I understand, Chairperson. Would you like me to comment now?
Well, you can comment now if you are able to, but if it's something that that needs more thought and more homework, you can go back and prepare something that would be much more meaningful and make arrangements to make it available to Ms. Tabashe, and then arrangements would be made whether you would need to come back and give evidence about it or how it could be used. But it is very, very important. Okay.
Yes. Chairperson, may I make a comment?
Yes, yes.
On that, please. Chairperson, I think this is a classic example of how the legislature and its committees have failed the people of the Free State by not allowing this issue to be interrogated at its inception, and when the alleged irregularities took place, and our committee chairpersons blocked opposition members' attempts to probe these issues. And now when opposition members in Parliament raised the issue, we were ridiculed and insulted by the governing party in attempts to deviate from those issues to something irrelevant. But I think, Chairperson, what is very important here is that members of the legislature and Parliament take an oath of office that they will protect the Constitution. And the constitutional mandate of the legislature is to hold the executive accountable individually and collectively. And if we fail to do that, then we are in fact in breach of our oath of office. And I think one of the problems of that is the political bosses are the premiers and the MECs. They have control over the members of the legislature and chairpersons of committees, because we work on a proportional system where a list is submitted, and those people in charge decide who is where on those lists. So the same culture of the fear that exists in the provincial government also would exist in the legislatures and even Parliament. And I was a member of Parliament from 2000 to 2006. I'm aware of how that functions as well. Chairperson, I think the remedy to this would be to look at the electoral system. We have a proportional system at provincial and national level. At local level, we have a hybrid system of first past the post and proportional that balances itself out. So I think the problem at national and provincial level specifically lies with the electoral system. And people are accountable to the political party and not necessarily through the proportional system to the people that elected them.
No, thank you very much. I do want to say that, and this is partly for the benefit of the legal team and the investigators, I am interested in members of provincial legislature, members of the executive in the provinces who may have adopted positions when members of the opposition sought to carry out their oversight obligations, who may have taken positions that defeated or had the potential of defeating the very purpose of the existence of oversight obligations and those committees, to be called here to explain their conduct in regard to specifics. And this Fred Dairy Farm topic might just be an appropriate one, because if somebody is asked questions, if an MEC is asked questions to account how taxpayers' money is being used in regard to this project and refuses to answer, then it's very important that we should know whether that person had any acceptable grounds for refusing to answer. And if they didn't have acceptable grounds, we may have to look at what is it that made them to adopt stances that sought to defeat oversight. So you might wish to have a look at that, because then we'll be talking specifics. They might be able to come and put up an explanation that, no, on such and such a date I had answered this question, here is proof, or something like that. But it's important to have a look at these issues, because when one looks at the levels of corruption in our country, it's important to see those who are given an obligation to take steps to make sure there's no corruption, or if corruption is brought to their attention, that they take steps to stop it. What have they been doing? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Jankelson, let's then move on to the last, well, the penultimate aspect, actually, and that is the evidence you set out at paragraph 18.50 on page 13 of the paginated bundle. And that flows into 18.51 all the way down to 18.54, really. The issues you raise here relate to the report of the Accountant General of February 2014. And much as that report we know is a report that continues to be a work in progress, Chairman, you have made certain observations here. You may or may not wish to bring specific ones to the attention of the Chairman.
Thank you, Chairperson. This is almost a summary towards the end of some of the arguments which I have already made. And I indicate in 18.49 on page 13 that if one considers the content of the National Treasury Report, as well as the context of all the information that I have set out in previous paragraphs in my affidavit, then the Premier, Mr. Ace Magashule, the former MEC Zwane, former MEC Kabate, acting MEC Lamlele, and former MEC of Finance Elsabe Rockman were pertinently aware of the issues and problems relating to Esteana, and in spite of that allowed substantial payments to be made towards this project while being pertinently aware of these issues. I also indicate that the failure to implement the disciplinary recommendations of the National Treasury Report against the former head of department makes them complicit in the greater Esteana scheme, and that they ought to also have implemented these recommendations. They were supplied with evidence of serious malfeasance in this project, and they deliberately ignored it, Chairperson. They were also aware of the skewed allocation of shares towards Esteana, which I mentioned, and that Esteana never contributed any of its own funds with the department. In spite of that, they also continued to pay funds over to Esteana. The contract was drafted in the Office of the Premier and indicates that the Premier should have been aware of this. I also mentioned that this is it's not just a normal agricultural project, it was a flagship project in the Free State, and there was a great deal of media interest in not only the project itself, but also the allegations of misconduct and the irregularities that took place there. The other aspect relates to what I think was a misrepresentation by Esteana, to the extent perhaps of which Paris were involved in the project. They must have been aware of this, because as I indicated in the documents and the replies I received, Paris was never mentioned. It was always only Esteana. They must have been aware, given the fact that the presentation that was made to the Executive Committee was on behalf of Esteana Paris, not just Esteana. If I was MEC, I would have asked that question. Where is Paris? And these are the guys with the skills. An IT company is not meant to implement a dairy project, so why are they not mentioned in any of those documents? They continued, Chairperson, to appropriate funds to this project. In spite of all of this, a very important issue. They were aware that there were no beneficiaries in this project. We were informed that former MEC Zwane, when questions were raised by the department, the National Department, and by ourselves in the legislature regarding to a list of beneficiaries, that it is alleged that, and the beneficiaries will be able to confirm this, who are coming to give evidence tomorrow, that they drove around with a loudhailer, informed people to meet at the community hall, took down names of people who might be interested in farming, and then submitted that as the beneficiary list. They were aware from the beginning that even because there wasn't perhaps a feasibility project, a feasibility study that was carried out, that there were no beneficiaries of the project. And as I indicated previously, a project of this nature cannot exist without beneficiaries. And they were complicit in sidelining these beneficiaries because they were aware of them, and because even today, with all the amounts of money that continue to be appropriated to this project, these beneficiaries are still not benefiting from this project. They are the real shareholders of the project. And even though we speak of a 51% allocation of shares, it's my opinion that these beneficiaries should eventually be 100% shareholders. Why would a provincial government want to hold shares in a dairy project when people on the ground in Vrede are suffering from unemployment, poverty, and inequality? Chairperson, the last issue relates to the cancellation of the project without penalties to Esteana. The documents indicate that a resolution was taken by the Executive Committee that this contract would be cancelled. We also know that funds were paid to Esteana after the contract was cancelled, and they allowed this to take place. As a collective, Chairperson, because it's an Executive Committee that took this decision, from the Premier right down to all the MECs who are involved in that committee.
Thank you, Mr. Jankelson. The only point I want to take up with you from the evidence you've just given is that relating to Paras. And I just want to point you to your Annexure RJ6, which is at page 148 of the paginated bundle. And it's a presentation on Mohuma Mobung, but it has the Paris and the Esteana names on it. You are not satisfied that this is sufficient evidence that there was some relationship between Esteana and Paris?
Chairperson, what we have here is a piece of paper with Paras's name of it. Name on it. There might even have been an agreement between Esteana and Paras, which I was not aware of. But if Paras were meant to be the people that supply the necessary skills and expertise to the project, and even training to the non-existent beneficiaries, then surely we would have seen them on the ground. Then surely they would have been mentioned in the many documents that we received from the provincial government, and I did not see them there, Chairperson. So perhaps they look, perhaps it's a paper, it was like the beneficiary list where the beneficiaries weren't involved. Perhaps Paras were the same. They were the company that was meant to give the expertise, but they just were non-existent and not involved.
Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry. What was said to be the relationship between Esteana and Paras in terms of your understanding from the beginning? What were you told was the actual relationship between the two?
Chairperson, Esteana was originally an IT company, so they wouldn't have the necessary expertise to implement and initiate a dairy project. So they would need some assistance from outside. And as far as I understood, Paras was the company that would partner with them with the necessary expertise. So Esteana would be the people who basically got the contract and signed the contract, but Paras would be the brains behind this project with the necessary expertise. And that is my understanding of what the relationship should have been between Esteana and Paras. And perhaps the failure of the project is perhaps proof that of Paras's non-involvement in this project, because it appears that even with the inflated prices and things, that there wasn't the necessary expertise to run a dairy farm of this magnitude.
So if the true position is that Paras was not involved and was never involved, then what we had here, would have been a dairy farm project that was run by IT people.
Chairperson, that is correct. I cannot say that they were never involved at all. What I'm saying is I've never seen them involved, and the project failed.
Yes. Okay, all right, thank you.
Chairman, it's important probably to bring to your attention and Mr. Jankelson's, and we have discussed this, but it's a document he has never seen really, that there is a memorandum of understanding between Paras and Esteana.
Okay.
But somebody else will deal with this.
We'll talk to it, yeah.
The point Mr. Jankelson makes is, in all the inquiries he made, nobody bothered to show him this particular document or explain the relationship between Esteana and Paras.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Jankelson, then the last aspect that you may want to touch on is, again, the relationship between Esteana and Vargafield. If you go to page 371 of the paginated papers, the public protector mentions these parties at her paragraph 5.3.17 and 18. You may want to make some comment on who Vargafield is or was and what you understood of that relationship.
Thank you, Chairperson. Before I deal with this specific instance, I just want to take you back to the article of the land of milk and honey, which the Guptas were alleged to have been involved and benefiting from this project. And if one looks at the evidence presented by the public protector in a report, and I'd like to go back to page 369, paragraph 5.3.12. of the public protector's report.
Yes.
Chairperson, the Public Protector indicates at 5.3.12, invoices obtained from the department on the additional purchase of animals were the following. And it's interesting to note that the animals that were bought from various people, but bought by a company called Verga Field, not Esteana. And then if we go on to the page 371 that was indicated, paragraph 5.3.18, the Public Protector indicates a search done on the CIPC website indicated that both companies are still registered separately, with the sole director of Esteana being Vasram Kamal and the sole director of Varga Field being Sanjay Grover. Now, I also confirmed this in a company search, and it appears that Mr. Sanjay Grover is a resident of Dubai. He doesn't live in South Africa. His company is registered at the same address where that guest house, which I mentioned right in the initially, which was bought with the gate and the guardhouse, which was some of those funds were bought, that they used the same address, Verga Field and Esteana, in their company documents. Now, just a basic online search of Mr. Sanjay Grover indicates that he appears to be the financial advisor of the Gupta family, and he also, through another company registered in Dubai, has a 10% share in Mabengula, together with other shareholders such as Duduzane Zuma and a person called Rajesh Gupta. Also a company which it is alleged the former Premier Ace Magashule's son was also employed by. So this raises further questions relating to the role of the Guptas in this project, and perhaps confirms that initial Mail and Guardian article that they were probably involved in this project. I also confirmed on the ground with individuals who were present that when this property, which I mentioned, the guest house, which was the offices of the Esteana company, was purchased, that there were members of that family present during the purchase of that property, which further confirms some of the allegations made in that Land of Milk and Money, not Honey article.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jankelson. I think that last portion you've dealt with brings us squarely to the supplementary affidavit statement that you've made. And I really just want to very quickly take you through the amendments that you'd like the chairman to note. The very first one really is a fairly minor one. You've corrected paragraph 3 of your original affidavit, 13 of your original affidavit, by correctly identifying RJ1 as the SOPA document and RJ2 as the Mail and Guardian article. You would agree with that?
That is correct, Chairperson.
And then at paragraph 18.24 of your original affidavit, you make a minor correction again, and that's the date on which the Esteana agreement was cancelled. The correct date is August 2014 and not April 2016, as you had indicated.
That is correct.
Then again, 18.26 again relates to that change of date. 18.26, instead of April 2016, you'd like that date to be substituted by August 2014.
That is correct.
When you get to paragraph 18.28, you ask that the whole paragraph be deleted in its entirety and substituted with a new paragraph. Could you please read your new paragraph into the record? It's your paragraph, your evidence.
In reply dated 28 April 2015 to a question to the MEC for the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development regarding whether disciplinary action was instituted against the senior officials as recommended in the National Treasury report, the acting MEC for the DARD, Ms. Oli Lamleli, indicated that no disciplinary action was instituted, which indicates further that the report was deliberately ignored. I attach here to Annexure RJ16 a copy of said reply.
Do you wish to make any further comment on that point?
No, Chairperson.
Thank you. Then we look at 18.56. Again, would you please read the part in bold, which you once substituted for what you had in the original version? Can you please read this into the record?
I further wish to place on record that in reply to the Public Protector as indicated in a report attached as Annexure RJ25, former Premier Ace Magashule indicated the following. We are also advised that a guest house which was procured in the town of Vrede to accommodate individuals responsible for the implementation of the project is included in the amount of 2.6 million. It was necessary to buy this property given the fact that there were no facilities in existence on the land in question at the commencement of the project. The Premier further committed to an assessment of value for money to be performed by the Free State Provincial Treasury.
Yes, thank you. Then your last insertion, which is the new paragraph 18.57, there you really just deal with the fact that you're annexing documents to this supplementary affidavit, which you mark as RJ26, and those documents speak to the issue you raised earlier. That's the property that was purchased in 2012 for 1.2 million, and that changed hands. You've given that testimony already.
That is correct, Chairperson.
The only issue I'll ask arising from this is I just found it rather curious reading the Public Protector's report, that all her questions appeared, well, the ones I was looking at, appeared to be directed to the Premier, much as they really related to the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. Is that the way you would normally do things in the Free State? The MEC is not the one whose responses are recorded here, but the Premier's.
Chairperson, one would think that both the MECs and the Premier and the Department would have been questioned and requested for information by the Public Protector.
Chairman, if you will indulge us just for 5 minutes of going through that presentation that did not quite work when we started off this morning. The team has been ready, willing, and able to take you through that. Mr. Jankelson, we're going to go back to that presentation that gave us a bit of trouble in the morning. If you could take the chairman through the various buildings on the farm so that he gets a sense as to what is there. And we've given you a hard copy, Chairman, of the presentation. The very last page of that hard copy has got the figures that MEC Kabate mentions in RJ9 as monies that were spent on those particular items.
Yes.
So we thought it might help inform you as you look at the pictures, even at your leisure later on, as to what the official response was in 2013 to where the money had gone to in respect of the buildings that we are going to show you now.
Yes, I think the hard copy is really quite helpful to me. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Jankelson, you ready?
Yes.
I think if you start at building at number 4, because I think the chairman is happy with 1, 2, and 3. Chairman,
Yes.
can we start at 4? Thank you.
Yes, you may start at 4.
Thank you, Chairperson. From my memory of my visits to the farm, 4 is the silage bunker, for which 5 million rand was allocated. Building number 5, which would be to the left of 4. There we are. is the cattle feed plant, where the silage is mixed for feed to feed the dairy cattle. The amount allocated in the presentations for this is 7.35 million rand.
7.35 million rand for that building where arrow number 5 is.
Is that for the building, for the walls and that, what looks like corrugated iron? Is that what your, is that what your understanding is of what the 7 comma something million was for?
Chairperson, the figures that I've presented here on this document are based on the replies that we received from the MEC. My visits to this farm, and the understanding that I got from our visits is that those are the buildings that are referred to in that document.
Yes.
I cannot verify whether the full amounts were spent on these buildings, but at least in the replies, that is what we were informed would be spent on these buildings.
Okay.
Number 6, building 6.
Building 6 is the office and milking parlor. 30 million rand was allocated for this, but this is also combined with the processing plant, which we saw in the previous slide close to the gate.
Yes, there'll be a couple of other pictures of that processing plant. Number 7.
Number 7 is the veterinary facility, for which 300,000 rand was allocated. 8 is the maternity facility. 500,000 rand together with item 9, which is a cattle shed, was allocated for those 2 facilities. So 8 and 9, which is a cattle shed, was 500,000 rand.
Yes.
Number 10 is just
I mean, those are, well, 9 seems to be a structure without a wall. I may be mistaken, but it looks like it's some poles, and there's corrugated iron on serving as a roof. Is that how it was when you went there?
yes, Chairperson.
It's poles that are put into the ground, and then on top of the poles, excuse me, then there is a roof that is made of corrugated iron.
Yes, Chairperson, obviously with a fence around it as well, because it has to house the cattle.
Yes, and is that clearly seems to be the case with regard to number 9. Number 8 does appear to have some walls. Is that correct or not?
Yes, number 8 does have walls. It is the maternity facility, so it does house calves, and they need walls around them.
But 8 and 9, you say, on your understanding, together cost about 500,000 rand.
That is correct, Chairperson.
Yes, okay.
I thought it was 7 million. Have I got it wrong? The feeding shed. Is that where we are?
Number 8 and 9.
Number 8 and 9 together, 500,000 with item 9. Yes. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah.
And then 10, 11.
Number 10 is just a cattle kraal. No amount is specified. I don't think much money would have been. So it's basically just a fenced-in area where the cattle are held.
Well,
Number 11.
You never know. You would be surprised. Yes. So you don't know the amount spent on number 10. Is that what you say? You don't know what amount?
There's no specified amount, Chairperson, but
yes.
I wouldn't think if there's just a fence around it, we'd be talking more than 1,000 or 2,000 rand.
Well, with evidence that I've heard in other
Chairperson, then number
Anyway,
11 and
number
12
11.
are feeding sheds. The cattle are brought in and fed, because in a dairy, ideally, cattle would be given certain rations, certain types of feed, dependent on their production. So they're fed according to that, and it should be a very scientific process. And 11 and 12 are the feeding sheds, which are, which it is mentioned cost 7.35 million rand. Also
Together.
rather excessive.
Together.
Together, yes.
What I see, and you must confirm because you have been to the farm, what I see both in regard to the shed at 11 and the shed at 12 is that it appears that it's some poles, there are no walls as such, it's poles maybe made of steel, I'm not sure, and that then there's a roof provided, but I don't see any wall. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chairperson. Inside this facility, there'd be steel structures where the cattle are brought in individually, each with their own feeding trough. They would be fed there and then led out of this feeding facility.
Yes, but you say the amount for the two sheds and whatever is inside in terms of those feeding troughs, you say the response from the department was that those two sheds cost 7-something million rand.
7.35, that is correct, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you.
Chairperson, I believe that if you look at the picture that's up now, especially the one on the extreme left, is that what
Yes.
the cattle feeding shed would be like from the inside?
That
Mr.
is
Jenkins?
correct, yes.
And that's what cost 7.3 million for two of those.
That is correct.
On the hard copy, where is that?
It's not, in number 11, Chairman, it's towards
Number
the back.
11.
I think the penultimate,
Is that at page 11?
on page 10 at the bottom, Chairman, it's item 11 at the top, but page 10 at the bottom.
Okay. Oh, yes.
So that's the structure on the inside.
Yes, okay.
The one at the bottom on the right, Chairperson, is the cattle shed that you were referring to, which doesn't have walls around it, which is numbered 9 in the previous slide. I see they don't have cattle in there, they have horses in there when the photograph was taken.
Okay, yeah, you're still at page 10, yeah. Okay, yes. Thank you.
Then, if you could just describe to the Chairman what the picture is that's up on the screen now.
Chairperson, on the far left is the photograph at the top of the processing plant, and the other photographs are just random photographs of the facility on the inside.
That is the milk processing plant on the inside.
That's correct.
Okay,
So those big tanks are the tanks that you would be using for churning milk and making cheese or yogurt or whatever.
That is correct.
Would facilities like this, I don't know if you have any expertise on this at all, Mr. Jankelson, have these single brick walls? I see you have very, very thin walls here. Is that normal for a building such as this?
Chairperson, I'm not able to answer whether that would be normal for a building like this. It does appear to be rather frugal.
It cost in the region of 30 million, this particular, I suppose with the contents, this particular plant.
With a dairy, yes, and one must also go and look at some of the equipment that was indicated in the MEC's reply, because I presume that some of that money might also have been used in this facility.
Yes. those particular items, the car and those tractor tires, where would those be kept?
Chairperson, this would be in the workshop and the storage shed.
So it really is just a building with walls and they keep this particular equipment in it.
Yes.
Then you have the next picture. Just describe to the chairman what this is.
Chairperson, this is the cattle feed plant. This is where the feed is mixed. So they would mix bales of feed together with silage and then perhaps grain, a different kind of feed, grain, in order to produce the feed which is fed to the dairy cows. As I indicated, it is a scientific process to feed dairy cattle and to give them the correct feed. I'm not an expert on that, and I'm sure one would be able to find someone who can deal with that.
We have a witness who will be dealing with that, Chairman. And then if we look at the maternity facility, just to give the chairman an idea as to what that facility looks like.
Yes, Chairperson, that is the maternity facility. That's where the calves are weaned or taken away from their mothers and would then be fed separately on some sort of formula to raise them up until they're able to go out into the field.
Now, Chairman, just for the record, these pictures were taken in March this year, just so you know when they were taken.
Okay.
Mr. Jankelson, are there any other matters you'd like to raise with the chairman before we close?
Chairperson, I think I've dealt substantially with most of the issues which I wanted to raise. What I would like to do in closing is to thank the Chairperson and the Commission for delving into the issue of the Vrede Dairy project. It is very important for the people of the Free State, but more important for those beneficiaries who have been given some hope for a better future, for a job, and ownership of something, and whose hopes have been dashed by the inactivity of this project. So we would like to thank the Chairperson and the Commission for the opportunity to come and speak to this issue and for dealing with this issue in the Commission. For us as Free Staters, it's very important.
Chairman, I have no further questions.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Jankelson. It's quite clear that you have played a very important role in seeking to establish exactly what happened with regards to this project and who should be held responsible. And you sent complaints to the public protector, and it seems that you have played a very important role, and we thank you for that. And again, going back to the issue that we discussed earlier on about members of the provincial legislature, how are they exercising their oversight functions in the provincial legislatures? Are there things that are done by their parties which undermine their oversight obligations? Are there things that are done by the executive to undermine their oversight obligations? Are there things that are done or said by certain members of portfolio committees and of the provincial legislature which defeat the very purpose of having these oversight obligations for members of provincial legislatures and the very purpose of having these oversight committees? And if so, what may need to be done to make sure that if in future similar problems arise, they would be dealt with differently for the benefit of the citizens? So it's important that if at all possible, you and other members of the provincial legislature, and the same thing applies to members of the national parliament, they must look at those issues and see whether there aren't issues they can bring to the commission to say, over the X number of years, we just have these constitutional obligations on paper. When we try to exercise them, we are defeated by people who don't want oversight functions to be carried out properly, or don't want accountability to be shown. So it's important to look at that, and if there is any information or evidence that can be put forward, that be made available to the Commission so that it can look at what recommendations it can make to make sure that oversight obligations and the oversight mechanisms are improved or are strengthened. Thank you very much. You are excused.
Thank you, Chairman. Might we just have 3 minutes to remove, so I can remove my papers? Ms. Buthelezi
Yes.
is indicating that she might have to run through to about 5 o'clock, if that
That's fine.
is all right.
We are at 25 past now. Shall we take 5 minutes? Is that enough to
That is
change?
sufficient, Chairman.
Yes. Okay, we'll take a 5 minutes adjournment. We
Thank you.
adjourn.
Thank you.
Ms. Buthelezi.
Afternoon, Chair. Chair, before we start with Mr. Fenter, there is a legal representative who would like to place himself on record.
Yeah, let's do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Afternoon, Chairperson. Thank you for your indulgence. My name is Tsidiso Ramokhale. I act for the former Premier, Mr. S. Magashule, and I just wanted to place myself on record and to also state that we've received a number of Rule 3.3 notices, which we will be responding to in due course.
Yes, no, that's fine. And you were present when I spoke to a group of legal representatives of various persons.
That's right,
earlier on, yeah.
in your chambers, that's right.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. My next witness would be Mr. Fenter. Mr. Fenter is a Deputy Director General at Corporate Administration and Coordination at the Office of the Premier Free State.
Yes.
Much of what he'll be dealing with today will be contracts that he drafted or his office drafted, as well as the opinions that he gave.
I don't know whether whenever an evidence leader starts, there is something wrong with either the voice or the mic.
I'll bring it closer.
That's much better.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, all right.
I was saying Mr. Fenter will be dealing much with the contracts that he drafted or that were drafted in his office and the opinions that he gave relative to the Free Added Dairy project.
Okay.
May I ask that the witness be sworn in?
Okay, thank you. Please administer the oath or affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
I'm Albertus Johannes Venter.
Do you have any objection with taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. To orientate you, Mr. Fenter, the bundle which contains your statement is marked HH2. Chair, there is a supplementary affidavit on that bundle which is marked HH2.2. The first part of the bundle is marked HH2.1. It
Well,
contains.
Well, even if it was simply attached, not as 2.2, just as a supplementary affidavit, it would have been fine. But it's okay,
Thank
the
you,
way
Chair.
it's done. That's all right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. The HH2.1, it's the one that contains its original statement. And I would
So
also.
that is what makes it confusing, because when somebody reads the transcript and sees HH2.1, they might look for a liver arch file that has got that on the spine.
Yes. Chair,
I wonder whether we shouldn't simply have this as Exhibit HH2 full stop. And it has got a number of things inside, including the supplementary affidavit.
I have no issues with that, Chair.
So we don't refer to HH21 and HH22. We just refer to each item as it appears.
Thank you.
Is that fine?
That is fine with me.
Yeah, and then
as you-
later on, you can take out the dividers that say 21 or 22.
I'll do so.
Okay,
I'll do
all
so,
right.
Chair.
Thank you.
Yes. Ms. Kabasha would like to know if we could do the same with Mr. Jankelson's file as
Yes,
well.
please, yes, yeah.
We'll do so, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Chair, I would like to then orientate Mr. Jankelson that the file containing your statements and the annexures is marked HH2. And then there are other files that I will refer you to. Our reference file, which has file A, B, C, I will only refer you to A and B. And there is a legislation file as well, which is marked HH legislation file. I will refer you to file A of that particular bundle of documents. Yes, thank you. Mr. Venter, on Exhibit HH2, there is a document, an affidavit that appears from page 1 to page 5 of that document.
I see it, Chairperson.
Do you confirm that is the affidavit you prepared for the commission?
Yes, indeed, it is my affidavit, Chair.
Yes. And the signature that appears on page 5 of this document, is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Then, Mr. Venter, would you please give us your qualifications and your employment history? I'm interested in your employment within the Free State government.
Thank you. Chair, I have a B.Juris LLB degrees. I am an attorney admitted to the High Court. I started my career in the legal profession as a public prosecutor, and after 7 years I switched to the side of the defense. I started with a firm of attorneys, completed my articles as it was known at that time, and I practiced in that firm for about 11 years. Just as background, my apologies, Chair, I'm suffering from a bit of a flu.
Yes.
But just as background, the firm had human rights practice, and I got involved in human rights cases. I did a lot of cases for the liberation movements prior to '94, unions as well as for civic organizations. And the reason why I'm saying this is that post '94, in about September '94, I was approached to form part of an interim management committee for the 3 police forces in the province. Apparently, the thinking at national level was that one force should not manage the other until the composite structure for the police services as we know it now has been finalized. So I was part of that management team, and I also became part of the national change management team dealing with change management of the police post '94, and it dealt from simple issues such as uniforms to more complicated issues such as structures and components. Whilst involved in these committees, I continued to practice, and then in the beginning of 1996, the post of Head of Department for Safety and Security, as it was known then, was advertised. I applied, and I was fortunate to be appointed following a selection process. That is how I arrived in government.
Yes. And are you still within the government at this stage?
Yes, Chairperson, I was transferred at the end of 2002 to the post of Chief State Law Advisor, which became vacant at that point in time. The previous incumbent retired, and subsequent to that, I was given additional responsibilities and functions to the extent that my post was upgraded, or upgraded is the right word, to that of Chief Operating Officer, which I occupied up to about 2007, when that post was abolished and I was transferred to the post that I currently occupy.
Yes, and for how long have you been in this post?
The current post from 2007 up to now.
And who do you report to in your current post?
I report to the Director General.
Thank you. As someone, or as a senior official within the Free State government, and someone who is based at the Office of the Premier, could you give us an overview of the structure of the Office of the Premier?
Chairperson, the organizational structure of the Office of the Premier, and I'm referring to Office of the Premier because that is how the department is referred to in the schedules to the Public Service Act, has 4 main divisions. And we refer to it as programs. Program 1 is the program that houses the Office of the Director General, the Chief Financial Officer, the person responsible for executive secretariat services, security services, risk management, and internal audit. Program 2 is my program, for which I'm responsible. It deals with human resource management, and that includes labor relations and employee wellness and so on. It includes skills development. There are 3 components, which is a training institute, a bursary management, as well as a broader provincial skills development, where we engage with the CITAs to try and get funding to train people in the Free State. Legal services is also reporting to me, IT, information technology, and communication services. I hope I've not left out any. Program 3 deals with policy and planning. It's a unit that looks broadly at the strategies of government, whether it fits into our provincial growth and development strategy, and how it fits into the national development plan and the medium-term strategic framework. And that unit will do impact assessments and propose policy changes from time to time to make sure we are more effective and comply with what is expected from us if we look at the national development plan. We have some time ago created a 4th program, monitoring and evaluation, and the functions of that unit is mostly to look at annual performance plans of departments, look at the state of the province address, budget speeches of MECs, engagements which politicians have with the community where certain commitments are made, and then list all of those commitments and track progress with that. It supports also the various committees of the legislature dealing with departments. That unit provides a report to the committee of the legislature, on which report the committee engages the particular departments.
Thank you. And does the Prima have advisors? If so, what would be their role?
Yes, Chairperson, I perhaps forgot to mention the in-office of the Premier, but it's a fairly small staff component looking at support to the Premier, him or herself, Chief of Staff, and a number of officials. The Premier may appoint 2 advisors. I must perhaps just indicate that Section 12, Capital A of the Public Service Act provides the authority to appoint advisors. These advisors are not employees. They are excluded from being employees in the Public Service Act per definition. And there is a directive issued by the Minister for Public Service and Administration which determines the conditions and the benefits of these advisors. They are, as such, on the payroll of government, to put it like this.
Thank you. These advisors, do they play any role in implementing government projects? For example, would they have a role to play in implementing the Esteana Dairy Farm project?
Chairperson, no. They are simply there to provide advice. The directive to which I have referred makes it also very clear that such advisors should desist from getting involved in the operations of a department.
Thank you. You gave us a supplementary affidavit this morning where you make a reference to the appointment of an advisor that was appointed in 2012, Mr. Narayan. Just tell us about his appointment, what you know regarding his appointment. What was he appointed to do?
Chairperson, I don't have any personal knowledge. I was requested by the investigators of the commission to provide them with a copy of the letter of appointment. I had, with the permission of my Director General, engaged with the Chief of Staff, who provided me with a copy of that appointment letter, and that letter copy is attached to my affidavit. That person was not part of the advisors appointed in terms of Section 12.2. There was mentioning made in an earlier State of the Province address of the previous Premier that he would appoint an Economic Advisory Council.
Yes, so is that Premier Magashule?
That is correct.
Yes.
And that council consisted of a
Mr.
number of...
Magashule. Mr. Magashule.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, there was a number of eminent people from the private sector who served on that committee.
Yes. Do you know anything about him traveling with the HOD for the Department of Agriculture in March 2012?
Try not to let him give evidence. Try not to.
Let me rephrase rather, Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry. Do you-
Chair-
I guess he has heard, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, give evidence. Yeah.
Yeah, Chairperson, I was not personally involved in any of the travel arrangements. I became aware of it later on when it emerged, I think when the Hawks executed the search and seizure warrant. It was one of the documents that they were looking for, and that is why I know that there is such a document.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. More evidence will come from other
Yeah.
witnesses regarding these aspects. I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, but if he became aware of a certain document that reflects a certain trip, he can give evidence about what he saw, or in terms of that document.
Yes.
The document you're talking about, what did it reflect?
Chairperson, if I remember correctly, and I must say that I think it was approval for a trip overseas to India for the head of the department who was supposed to be accompanied by Mr. Narayan. That
Yes.
document was a document which I think was in the archives of the Department of Agriculture. So it was
Yes.
not a document that I sourced and handed over to the Hawks.
Yes, okay. Do we have that document? Will it come later, or is it something we don't have?
It's something that we do have
We
it.
do
I'll
have.
just have to find the correct reference.
No, that's fine.
I'll ask
That's
Mr. Venter to confirm it later.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. Mulife is helping me to locate the document. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Then let's go back to your program. What is your role in your program?
Chairperson, I manage the various components to which I have referred earlier, but given the amount of legal work that we have or that we are responsible for, I also handle certain matters myself, and that includes written advice, opinions that we are requested for, oral opinions, some contracts, although I do a little, and then also a number of litigation that I handle.
So, as Deputy Director General of Corporate Administration and Coordination, there are certain units or sections that fall within your authority that you are responsible for. Is that right?
That is correct, Chair.
And you said there are 3 of them, is that correct?
Chair, it's a bit more than
Or it's
3.
more than 3?
It's human resource management, human resource development, which is both has subdivisions,
Oh, okay.
information technology, communication,
Yes, okay. But
legal
one
services.
part of your responsibility or part of the responsibility of your section is giving legal advice. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairperson, I have a team of 6 people at this point in time. It includes myself, who are legally...
Sorry, that is 60?
6. Yes,
Is that legal advisors?
that is correct.
Yes, including yourself.
Including myself, people who
Okay.
are legally qualified.
Okay, yes.
It cons-
And I think earlier on when you were describing the office of the Premier, I got the impression that initially I thought you are within the office of the Premier, but I think later on when you were explaining, it appeared that that might not necessarily be so. You are for something much wider, and then the office of the Premier is a smaller office. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairperson, that is correct. And it is unfortunately unfortunate that the confusion is created by the naming of that department in the Public Service Act. Because when one refers to Office of the Premier, many people envisages the 4 walls within which the Premier sits.
Yes, yes.
Whilst we have a component of approximately 600 people at this point in time,
Yes.
there's a large number of community development workers which forms part of a component known as the intervention unit, which try and deal with issues on the ground, and it's part of the monitoring and evaluation program that I've referred to earlier.
Now, I know that with provinces, there would be a Director General of the province, and then there would be heads of departments that whose political heads are MECs. You are Deputy Director General. Are you Deputy Director General in terms of the province as such, and the person you report to is the Director General of the province as such?
Chairperson, no, although the Director General has wider functions than a head of department, if one looks at Section 7 of the Public Service Act, my responsibilities relates only to the department which we call the Office of the Premier, and that component program too.
Oh, okay, all right. Now I understand. So, but the office and person that I referred to as the Director General of the province, is that same person or the holder of that office also in effect the Director General of the so-called Office of the Premier? Is that correct?
Yes, Chairperson, that is indeed correct.
Oh, okay. No, thank you. So you would be reporting to that person, and you are Director General, you are Deputy Director General, Coordination and Corporate Administration and Coordination in the Office of the Premier, in that department.
That is correct, Chairperson.
Okay, now I understand.
Thank you
Okay.
so much, Chair. Mr. Fentel, the document that I wanted to refer you to is on page 669 of reference bundle C. Those 2 files in front of you, bundle C, page 669. So there will be a small c on the spine, reference bundle HH, then a small c on the spine.
C.
C, yes.
Chairperson, I have bundle C here, but it starts at page 839.
I think mine starts on that page number as well, Mr. Frontal.
No, oh, so I'm looking at the wrong number, so I'm so sorry, Chair. The correct number is 1323.
Is the bundle,
1,000?
is the bundle the
The bundle is
correct
the
bundle?
same, yes. But the page number, I was referring to the wrong page.
What's the
numbers.
page number?
It's 1323.
1323.
Yes, it's not really visible on my copy because there's something written on top of it, but I am told it's the correct number. It's under tab
yes.
91.
I do have it.
Thank you. Is that the document that you saw relating to Mr. Narayan's travel?
Please wait for me, Ms. Buthelezi. Yes, I'm also there.
Thank you. Can you please identify that document and tell the chair what it contains?
Chairperson, it could be the same document. I must confess that the previous time I looked at a similar document was quite fleeting.
Yes.
But it looks like the document that I've seen at the time when the Hawks executed the warrant.
Yes, it goes up to page 1326. Can you confirm that?
Yes, indeed.
And would you please then tell us what is on page?
Well, I'm sorry, Ms. Buthelezi. Doesn't the document go up to 1324, and then there's an annexure to it that starts at 1325?
That's correct, Chair.
Yeah, so it's not the same document.
Yes,
Yeah.
the annexure start from page 1325.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's related to this document.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Chairperson, the document is headed Request for Approval for Head of Department for Agriculture, Mr. P.M. Tabete, and Ashok Narayana to attend a strategic meeting with a strategic partner in India from the 9th of February to the 4th of March 2012 in support of the expansion of dairy farming in the Free State.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Narayana is spelled Narayana. Thank you. And then,
You said earlier on, Mr. Fenton, that the document that you saw was an approval of a trip, I think to India, by Mr. Mahashule. I see that this document at page 1324, although it has 3 signatures, the 2 signatures which are supposed to, well, the one which is for the MEC the MEC is supposed to have crossed out one of 2. There is recommended and there is not recommended, and nothing is crossed out as it seems to me. And just above the name of Mr. Mahashule, it says recommendation 4.1 approved dash or hyphen not approved by, and then nothing is crossed out, but there seems to have been a stamp that was put there and it's not legible. I don't know whether whatever was written on that stamp indicated that the Premier approved or not approved, but I thought I would draw that to our attention. Do you have anything to say?
Chairperson, if I may guess, it's not very clear, but it looked rather like the type of stamp that would be put onto a document when payment needs to happen.
Yes, but my question was really aimed at establishing whether, since you said the document that you saw was one in which Mr. Mahashule was approving a certain trip,
Yeah.
and this doesn't seem to approve anything. My question was whether you think this is the same document that you saw.
Chairperson, it could be. I did not look at that first document with quite attentively due to the circumstances prevailing at that point in time.
Obviously, by signing, the intention was to do one of the 2, but without crossing out one, it's not clear which one.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
thank
I
you.
don't know if you are able to assist Ms. Buthelezi, but it caught my attention that he did not cross out.
Any election.
Yeah, he didn't elect to say he was approving or not approving.
I understand, Chair, and I noticed that. But I would like to refer Mr. Venture to the annexure to this document that appears from page 1325. What does the document informs you, if I may?
Chairperson, it looks like a quote from a travel agency. If we
Like a what?
A quotation from a travel agency.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yes, and the document on page 1326, what does it inform you?
Chairperson, it's probably the second
that
page
not
of
a-
the
yeah,
quotation.
This is,
That
but for a
seems like
different
a-
person now. Yes.
Is that not a second page of the document at page 1325?
Yes, it is.
It looks like it's the same, page 2 of the same document.
Yes, it is, Chair. Mr. Fenter, the person that is quoted for flights on page 1325, could you please give us the name that is there?
That is Mr. Tabete Mabana Peter.
And what position did he hold at the time?
He was the head of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development.
Yes, and on page,
And this was, I see that quotation is dated 24 February 2012. Is
That
that
is-
the position he held at that time?
Yes.
Okay.
yes, and on page 1326, whose name appears there?
That is Mr. Ashok Narayan.
And what position did he hold at the time, according to your knowledge?
You mean what name appears at the top? There's another name appearing at the bottom of the, you mean the one at the top?
Yes, the one at the top, yes.
Okay, that's Mr. Narayan, yes.
Chairperson, I don't know
You're not.
what position he occupied at that point in time.
He did not hold any position within your government.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Chair, there will be witnesses that will testify with regards to this trip, as well as the approval and the people who traveled. May I?
Okay.
I'll leave it here at that stage. Thank you.
Yes. But to the extent that it is meant to say that the Premier approved, there might be need to, there might be a need for evidence to show approval other than the letter, because the letter doesn't seem to show approval or
Noted.
disapproval.
Noted, Chair. Thank you. Let's then move to the first time that you, Mr. Venter, you heard about the Free Dairy project. When was this?
Chairperson, that was during a meeting of the Executive Council which I attended I think it was on the 13th of June, if I remember correctly,
Which year?
2012, my apologies.
Thank you. May I proceed?
It was a presentation which was made by the then head of department, Mr. Tabete, in which the project was explained to the Executive Council, and there was also a request made for an additional allocation to the budget of the department of 84 million rand in order to execute this project.
And the reference to the department here now is the reference to the Department of Agriculture.
Indeed, my apologies,
Yes,
Chair.
okay, okay.
Yes. And what was your view on the project at the time?
Chairperson, it sounded like an excellent project when I listened to it, how it was presented.
Maybe you could just indicate the essence of what you were told, what the Executive Council was told this project was about. Yeah.
Chairperson, it's a long time ago, but I still remember it well.
Yes.
The picture that I formed in my head when it was presented was that the farm, the Kranos List farm, which was the farm on which this project was to be executed, will be divided into portions on which emerging farmers would be, which would be allocated to emerging farmers to have milk cows on it, and then to milk the cows, and that milk which has been produced would have been picked up. There would have been a service picking up all the milk from the emerging farmers on the farm. That milk would have eventually be processed by a processing plant, but it was not enough to make the processing plant a viable economic option. And therefore, a milking parlor had to be constructed in terms of which, or through which milk would be produced in high volumes. But that milking parlor would then be used to train these emerging farmers to become dairy farmers using the latest equipment and technology instead of milking the cows wherever they were housed. My understanding was that the processing plant would then be run by Esteana, or not by, it will be constructed by Esteana. It was their responsibility to construct the processing plant, and that a company would be established in which Esteana and the beneficiaries would have shares. And the beneficiaries would then, from the sale of the products that are being produced at the processing plant, receive dividends as shareholders in that company. What made it sound particularly good was, and I think Mr. Jankelson referred to as well, that there was beneficiation within the province. Our milk has, in large quantities, been exported outside to the province where it was processed. But what made it attractive was the fact that the town of Vrede or Pumalela and the farm was close to the N3. So it would have been easy to transport these processed products to Gauteng as well as to KwaZulu-Natal, where there was apparently a big market for that. So it sounded very well at that point in time. And I may just add that the processing plant was supposed to produce milk, fresh milk, yogurt, butter, cheese, whatever milk product there is, this plant was supposed to produce it. That was my understanding of what was presented.
Thank you. If I may refer you again to the reference bundle A at page 323. Page 323 of bundle A.
Okay.
Chair, I'll be only using A and C on the reference bundles, and if you could just leave those two next to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Page 323.
23.
Okay, thank you. You can proceed.
Thank you. Could you please identify that document and tell us what it informs us?
It is a resolution of the Executive Council following the presentation which was made by the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development.
Yes, and what's the date on that document?
13 June 2012.
Yes, and what does it tell us?
It basically records the resolution of the Executive Council. There are various resolutions. One is that the Executive Council approved the following recommendations. One below that is the implementation of the proposed integrated Vrede dairy agribusiness project. Two, under that, supports the sourcing of additional funding of 84 million for this current financial year from the province. Then B, the Executive Council further agreed that one, where possible, the department should meet the costs and will be later refunded and engage other relevant departments. Roman 2, the matter to be further discussed in the Treasury Committee is a matter of urgency. Roman 3, FTC should play a role, especially from the business point of view. Roman 5, for the next 3 years, the Department of Agriculture will have to pay 113,000, it looks like, but it is probably million.
Yes. As someone who was at this meeting, did you understand why there would be, why there was some sense of agency that is referred to on the third last point from the points that we've just read?
Chair, if I remember correctly, the matter of urgency was because of the fact that it was a project which was mentioned in the State of the Province address of the Premier, and there was an obligation to implement that project in that financial year.
Yes. And if I look at point number 3 from the top of the points that we've just read to the record, sorry, it's point number A, Roman figure 2, that the ESCO was supporting the sourcing of the additional 84 million rand. How much was initially budgeted for this project, if you know?
Chairperson, if I remember correctly, the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development indicated that they reprioritized funds from other projects and they were able to get 30 million together, but they need another 84 million in order to get to an annual cost or an annual contribution of this project of 114 million.
Okay. So the original amount budgeted was 30 million rand. Is that your evidence?
Chairperson, I'm not sure. One will have to look at the Appropriation Act that was approved by the legislature at that point in time to see what was originally budgeted. But as I say, as my memory serves me correct, if my memory serves me correct, the department reported in that meeting that they reprioritized funds from other projects as well to get that 13 million together.
Thank you. Then let's then go back to your statement. I'll take you to paragraph 2.1. It's on the first page of your statement, where you deal with the opinion that you gave to the Accountant General of the province. Would you please take us through this opinion that was provided to the Accountant General?
Chairperson, this opinion was provided by Advocate Atira in the unit.
That is in your unit?
She's in my unit.
Yes.
She was approached by the Accountant General in the Provincial Treasury, Mrs. Fourie at that point in time.
So there would be, I'm sorry, you know, earlier on we talked about an Accountant General. So there would also be a person holding the position of Accountant General in a provincial government as opposed to national government.
That is correct, Chairperson.
Yeah, and the one you're talking about here is a provincial one.
That is correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. You actually attach that opinion or letter or correspondence as Annexure A. It appears on page 6 of bundle H2. Would you please take us what was the opinion about and what were you was sought that you clear?
Yeah. Chairperson, I may just perhaps say that on the 18th, when Mrs. Fourie engaged with Advocate Atira, I was out of the office, I was not there. But
yes.
Advocate Atira phoned me and expressed her concern about the June contract. And the June contract is a contract which the department concluded with Esteana
Yes.
somewhere early in June of
Yes.
2012.
Okay.
Chair, there will be a witness that will take us through that contract.
Yeah.
This witness didn't have any knowledge thereof. Please proceed.
Yes. So as you understood the position, the person in your section was approached by the Provincial Accountant General for what?
For advice on that
On
June
the-
agreement.
On the agreement between the department and Esteana?
That is correct.
Yes, okay, yes, continue.
When she phoned me and raised her concerns, I contacted the then Director General.
Yes,
And the advice from the then Director General was that we should, in our advice to the Provincial Treasury, request that the Treasury Committee refer that contract back to us
yes.
to have a look at it again. Now, the reason why the Treasury Committee was mentioned is that the resolution of the Executive Council, which I read out just now, referred that this matter must be referred to the Treasury Committee. Because there was a significant budget issue to be addressed at 84 million, it is normally something that the Treasury Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Executive Council, would look into and interrogate before any final decisions were made.
So was the person in your unit asked by the Accountant General, the Provincial Accountant General, for an opinion whether the agreement between Esteana and the department was valid legally? Is that what was asked?
Yeah.
As you understood the position?
Yes, that is how I understood it.
Okay,
And there
thank
were
you.
certain concerns raised by Advocate Atira about the
Yes.
validity.
Of the agreement?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Chairperson, in the private sector, the meeting of minds normally results in an agreement. But in the public sector, when a bid is advertised and the bid is awarded, that is the guiding, your guidance to prepare an agreement. And your procurement process normally provides you with the deliverables from both parties to enable you to at least capture that in the agreement, amongst other things that you normally find in an agreement. And at that point in time, if I remember correctly, there was a judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal, and I think it was TEB Properties versus the MEC for Health and Social Development Northwest, in which the court ruled that when an agreement is inconsistent with your bid documents, the agreement is void, and as far as it is inconsistent, and it is was very important for us to make sure that any agreement that we prepare would be consistent with what was the outcome of the procurement process. And at that point in time, it was reported to me that it appeared as if there was no procurement process, and the agreement would be, as a result of that, void. That was the issue that was reported to me.
Thank you. And where was this agreement drafted? Who drafted this agreement?
Chairperson, it was not my unit. I don't know who drafted it. It was
Yes.
submitted to Treasury, and from Treasury it was forwarded to our offices, but I have no idea who drafted it.
Yes.
Thank
I
you.
think I may have interrupted you at a time when you were saying you spoke to the Director General after a person in your unit had spoken to you about concerns relating to this agreement, and that you said that the Director General gave you certain advice. I think I interrupted you at that level. I interrupted you and Ms. Buthelezi at that level. Ms. Buthelezi, was that covered, or did I take you off track?
Chairperson, I think I mentioned it, but I'll repeat it. The advice that was received from the Director General is that in the response to Treasury, we should indicate that the Treasury Committee should submit that agreement to our office for
Yes,
proper
okay.
interrogation.
Okay.
Yes, and then what happened to this agreement? Was it actioned, or was it declared invalid and it was the end of it?
Oh, well, Mel, let's hear first. Was Treasury then asked to submit it back or submit it to your office?
Yes, Chairperson, in the advice which Advocate Tira wrote to the department, it is on page AJV 6, attaches Annex A to my affidavit. In point 4, she wrote that we suggest that you propose to the Treasury Committee that the agreement and the procurement documents be sent to us for review.
Yes, then what happened following that review process?
Chairperson, I had a meeting with then head of the department, Mr. Tabete, indicating to him what I've related to you earlier, how important the procurement process is to us. When he came to meet with me, he brought along an international agreement concluded between South Africa and India on agricultural cooperation, as well as, I think, the Black Economic Empowerment Charter. And I indicated to them, although that could be an important role players or documents to be considered in drafting the agreement, we are still very keen to look at the procurement process and to see what the deliverables are. He indicated that he will submit it to me, and after that meeting, I engaged Advocate Tira again. I might just perhaps explain that all new work that comes in for legal services comes through my office, and I allocate it to the legal advisors in terms of the amount of work that they are managing at that point in time. Since she was involved in this, I thought it appropriate that she should continue with it. And a letter was then drafted by her, which I gave certain input into, requesting the head of the department for certain information in order to enable her to prepare the agreement. Subsequent to that, there was correspondence exchange between her and the head of the department, of which my office was copied, which in those correspondence, that information did not come to the fore.
That is now the information to what effect?
The information which was requested in the first letter by Advocate Tira to enable her to prepare an agreement.
Okay.
Chair, if I may just
Did that include information about whether there had been compliance with procurement procedures?
That is correct.
Okay, that was not supplied.
That was not supplied.
Yeah.
I may just mention that the concern which was also raised by Advocate Tira is that there was supposed to be a 30 million rand initial payment, but in the first agreement it was not clear what exactly the deliverables for that 30 million rand was supposed to be. And what we agreed then is that we should get the information and rather prepare a proper agreement that at least covers that 30 million rand. Because that was the concern which Treasury raised, to say there is a 30 million payment that must be made, but we are not sure if we look at the contract what is supposed to be delivered for that 30 million rand.
1 second. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And then, Mr. Fenter, then that agreement was never actioned upon. Is that your evidence? The first agreement that...
No, Chairperson. I don't think that agreement was implemented. In the next week, I'm aware that there were certain engagements between Advocate Tira, the head of the department, and officials from Treasury. I was on leave the subsequent week, and Advocate Swanepoel was acting in my place.
And what was the date of that week?
Chairperson, I think it was from the 2nd to the 6th of July,
24.
2012.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I follow. When Advocate Tira called you after she had been approached by the Provincial Accountant General, there was already an agreement between the Department of Agriculture and Esteana. And she was asked to give a legal opinion on whether that agreement was valid. And she was concerned about the validity of the agreement with special reference to what appeared to have been lack of compliance with procurement procedures. Is that right?
That is correct, Chairperson.
And she expressed that to you, and you had a discussion with the Director General, and the Director General's advice was your unit must ask the Provincial Treasury to send the agreement to you. Was it to your unit? Was the agreement ever sent to your unit?
Chairperson, our decision was to be proactive, to request that information
Yes.
before even...
Before they sent they could send the agreement.
Yeah, before the agreement even arrived.
Yes.
So that,
And the information was requested, which included information about whether there had been compliance with procurement procedures. And although there was a response, there was no specific response in regard to whether there had been compliance with procurement procedures. Is that right?
that is correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Chairperson, in the next week,
Yes.
when I was on leave, there were certain engagements. It would be hearsay if I relate that.
Yes, but
But-
between your unit and who?
The Department of Agriculture, Treasury was involved,
Yes, okay,
that I'm aware of.
okay,
There may be other officials as well.
yes, yes.
I was then informed that a new agreement was drafted, and that agreement was signed, and that was on my return to office on the 9th of July.
Yes. Now, referring to the agreement that you referred to on paragraph 2.2 of your statement, that is the second agreement.
Yes, Chairperson, that is it. It was signed on the 5th of July.
Yes. And where was this agreement drafted? Who drafted this agreement?
Chairperson, the agreement was drafted by Advocate Tira.
From your office?
From my office, and I understand that Advocate Swanepoel, who was acting in my place, also made certain inputs. I was unfortunately at a place where I could not receive emails
Okay,
through the cell phone network. I could receive a short message, but the moment there was a bulky attachment, it simply did not deliver.
Okay. From what you know, who requested that this second agreement now be drafted at your office?
Chairperson, I'm not sure if it was a specific person, but
Yes.
it could be emanating from the fact that we said we need an agreement that provides deliverables for that 30 million, because the first agreement was not clear about it, and I think it was one of the issues that Treasury raised to say we have a problem with the 30 million because we are not sure for what it is to be expended. So that second agreement was supposed to address the 30 million, but also pave the way for the rest of the implementation of the project.
Yes. And Mr. Venter, would you please make us understand why this agreement that was for the Department of Agriculture was being drafted at the office of the Premier?
Chairperson, I may be a bit lengthy, but pardon me, please. Chairperson, I cannot really say what happened prior to 94, but immediately after the 94 elections, there was a resolve from government to create a strong legal unit within the office of the Premier. And I'm aware of that because at that point in time, while still practicing, I served on at least 2 panels when we made appointments, and one of those panels was for the Chief State Law Advisor, who was the person who retired, into which post I was transferred. At that point in time, departments did not have legal advisors, although they were appointed subsequently. But the resolve was always that in the office of the Premier, in that department, there needs to be a very strong legal component. One of the reasons being that in terms of the old Treasury instructions, that legal advisors' central component had a role to play in advising accounting officers on issues with financial implications. And the same instructions at that point in time provided that contracts had to be submitted to the state attorneys. Now, when the PFMA replaced those instructions, the state attorneys indicated to us that we have no obligation anymore in terms of the Treasury instructions, so you will have to look at the contracts yourselves, which we carried on. A lot of legal work had been referred to us at that point in time, and in 2005, we formalized the relationship to some extent where the Director General concluded a protocol for legal services with the various accounting officers, basically just indicating when we are requested for legal advice, how should it be structured and how should it arrive at our office and what is our response and time frame. So it's basically just a sort of a civil level agreement, but we refer to it as a protocol for legal services. In that time or subsequent to that, we discovered as legal advisors in the office of the Premier that in instances where bids were awarded and that awarding of a bid was made subject to a service level agreement, that in many instances the service provider drafted their own agreement, submitted to the department, and they signed it. And those agreements did not necessarily protect the interests of government. So I made a point to raise that with my Director General on more than one occasion. And we picked it up in commercial contracts in the private sector. It's quite prevalent that you get an indemnity clause where the parties agree to indemnify each other in certain circumstances. And I pointed it out to the Director General, and I think I mentioned that also to a meeting of heads of department, I'm not sure, that we have come across agreements which were signed which include an indemnity clause in which the particular department or the accounting officer, the head of the department, indemnifies the service provider against whatever it was. And I pointed it out to them that in terms of the PFMA, Section 66 determines that only the MEC for Finance can borrow money, issue a guarantee, or an indemnity, or commit a department for a future financial commitment. But more importantly, I pointed it out to them that I think it's Section 86 of the PFMA creates a crime. If you are not authorized, if you are not the MEC and you sign an indemnity or give a guarantee and so on, and I indicated to them in blunt terms that if you've done it, you've committed a crime. All that needs to happen is for you to be arrested, and so serious it is. So please send those agreements to us. And then in 2010, this directive was issued, and I cannot say it's because of the things that I related. I have no idea what motivated it, because it was mentioned firstly in a meeting that the Premier had with CFOs, heads of supply chain management and heads of department, and subsequently repeated in the Executive Council, that all contracts must be submitted to my office for the state law advisors to consider. I must immediately also just say, Chairperson, that it is not in all procurement processes where a service level agreement or a subsequent contract is necessary. In many instances, the specifications in a bid document is sufficient enough to create a relationship on acceptance by a bid by the accounting officer to constitute a proper agreement. And in many instances, the delivery of a single item is required, and the time is specified in the bid, so it is unnecessary to basically repeat what is already in existence. But some agreements, or some bids are advertised subject to the signing of a service level agreement where it is necessary to manage service to be delivered over time and the payments and whatever is necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Venter. So when you get these requests to draft contract for the department, how far do you go? Do you interrogate the service supply chain management processes that have been followed? What is it exactly that you look at to enable you to draft these documents?
Chairperson, when we have arranged with the legal advisors and departments and we work with them, it's our purpose to build their capacity as well. So we don't want to just keep all the franchise to legal knowledge under our wings. There's a duty on us to build capacity in departments, and we're trying our best to do it. And I must say that there is now currently more stability in departments, and there are more capacitated legal advisors in departments, which makes our job a lot easier. But we have an arrangement with them that once a contract is submitted to our office, it must be a draft. They must first prepare a draft, and when the draft arrives, it must be accompanied by all the procurement documents, the bid minutes of the bid adjudication and bid evaluation committees, so that we can go through the bid, what was submitted, what was accepted, and what the deliberations in the committees were, to enable us to make sure if there appears something out of that committee meeting, especially the adjudication committee, that we can capture it into the agreement. But that is the standard practice at this point in time.
Yes. With regards to this particular contract, what information did you have in preparation of this contract? The Free-Headed Dairy Farm contract, Esteana and the Department of Agriculture contract.
Chairperson, there was a project proposal which was supposed to be attached to the agreement. And I don't think it was, but reference was made to it, so that information was available. At that point in time, it was supposed to be Annex B to that agreement, but it was not attached to the document that was signed.
Yes.
Procurement information was there.
Chairperson,
And the
there was a submission that I've seen where the head of the department approved the appointment of Esteana on a deviation from the procurement process, which was authorized in terms of Treasury Regulation 16 capital A 6.4. But in that submission, it was not clear what the reasons for the deviation were. There is a subsequent, or not a subsequent, a Treasury instruction basically dealing with the threshold values when you can procure without quotes, when you can procure with 3 quotes, when you can procure on quotations from all the possible service provider on the database, and then above 500,000 it must be a bid. That Treasury instruction also indicates that when an accounting officer decides to deviate from the bid process, there are certain things that must be done. And that was not in that submission. And some of two of the things that need to be done is, one, a copy of that must be submitted to Treasury and to the Auditor General. And it was an audit issue later on that I became aware that the Auditor General had issues because those requirements were not complied with.
Is what you are saying, among other things, that you were provided with documents in order to enable you to draft the agreement, and one or more of those documents suggested that either there had been an approval for deviation from procurement processes or procedures, or that one or more documents indicated that a request should be made for approval for deviation. Which of the two did the documents in front of you suggest was the case?
Chairperson, I'm aware of the submission that requested deviation and it was approved.
Or there was a request among a document containing a request for deviation among the documents that were given to you?
That I became aware of,
That you
yes.
became aware
Yes.
of, and at some stage you also became aware that the request for deviation had been approved
That is correct.
and had been approved by the right authority.
The right authority, although there were compliance issues
Okay,
in
all
that
right.
document.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Who exactly in your office concluded or drafted this document?
That, if you refer to the agreement, it
Yes,
was
the agreement.
the Advocate de Tira.
It was Advocate Tira.
That's correct.
Yes. Because I want to refer you to certain clauses in this document, if you may be able to assist. On page 8 of this agreement, I'm interested in clause 2. I'll start reading from clause 2.1, that the department has, in line with the vision Mohuma Mobung initiative, identified the need to establish a dairy project in Frieda. The government of Republic of South Africa and India entered into a memorandum of understanding on agricultural cooperation, which include promotion of agricultural trade and investment. The department has met Paris Dairy, the largest private milk producer in India, who has technical know-how and has the right to the international brand names, and has agreed to work with the department. Is there any agreement that you had sight of between the department and Paris?
Chairperson, no, not the department in Paris. I've never seen such agreement.
Thank you.
Did you come across any agreement that involved Paras, even if it was not with the Department of Agriculture, in regard to this project?
Chairperson, there may be an agreement between Paras and Esteana,
Okay.
but it is not part of my file
Yes,
content.
okay. Thank you.
Yes.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, the previous witnesses
Oh,
mentioned something,
okay.
but
Yes,
it's
okay.
not part of the documents that we
That came
ever
to you.
received.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Then let's move on to paragraph 2, clause 2.4. Esteana is the counterpart of Paras Dairy in South Africa, and therefore sole provider who can execute the project. What I want to understand from this clause is that, what is your understanding of a sole provider?
Chairperson, if you read the clause, it means it is the only entity at that point in time who could provide the service. And in discussions afterwards with the head of the department, he mentioned that as one of the reasons why he deviated. And just as an example, I think when we consulted with the evidence leader, I used the example of Microsoft. So we all use Microsoft. And if we want to procure from Microsoft, we can't go to other companies to buy products if we want Microsoft products as a platform, for instance. So we have to procure from Microsoft, and Microsoft is the sole provider at that point in time for whatever needs to be procured.
And in your view, would you consider a dairy farmer as a sole provider?
Or maybe the question, maybe we should put it this way. Bearing in mind your understanding of what this project was about, what do you think about the statement that Paris Dairy was the sole provider of this kind of service?
Chairperson, I have to rely on my memory on issues which was raised during the audit and the response thereto. And why I'm aware of it is the previous MEC for Finance created an intervention committee where issues in the annual audit that is being raised by the Auditor General is submitted, and the relevant officials from a particular department are then called to that meeting to come and explain why this audit query is raised and whether it can be resolved or not. And my memory on the reasons for this deviation comes from that committee. And again, my apologies, it's a long time ago and I did not expect the question, so I did not do any research to see if I have any paperwork.
Okay.
But if I remember correctly, what was related in that meeting was that various companies in South Africa were approached to form part of this initiative, and there was no interest. So
okay, that was your understanding of
that
what
was
had
my
happened.
understanding.
Whether it was factually so, you don't know.
I have no idea. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. And if I may refer you to the next page, page 9, and it's clause 2.5. This clause states that Esteana is willing and able to execute the project and has necessary experience and expertise in connection therewith. We have had the evidence earlier on from Mr. Jankelson that Esteana was actually an IT company. Was this interrogated when this contract was drafted?
Sorry, where were you reading from, Ms. Buteresi?
The next page, Chair, it's page 9. It's clause 2.5 of the contract. It's
Okay.
right on top. Thank you.
Chairperson, I'm not aware whether it has been interrogated and the extent if it was. But from my own perspective, when I am supposed to draft an agreement on behalf of a client department, I will be very reluctant to include clauses like that. Because basically you commit yourself in an agreement that the service provider has the capacity to do it. And once you've agreed that, you are bound to what you've agreed, whether or not it is the truth eventually. You commit yourself to a specific statement of fact in an agreement. And it will be very difficult then to get out of it based on the fact that there was no capacity. So I wouldn't include it as if I was a drafter of this agreement.
Is this something that one would expect that someone in your office should interrogate before committing to this clause in the contract?
Yes, Chairperson, I think it's unfortunate that it slipped in. It should not have been there.
Thank you. And you have already told us that you've gotten the information from the department in order to enable you to draft this contract. Other than that information, what else informs you on what terms you should include in the contract?
Chairperson, except from the project proposal that must have been there, as I've indicated, I'm aware of a number of engagements between the legal advisors in our office and the department, and the information which is captured here could be from those engagements, in all probability.
Yes, and on paragraph 2.3 of your statement, it's on page 2 of your statement, you talk about the request that you received from the municipal manager of Prima municipality. Please take us through that request, and who was the municipal manager at the time?
Chairperson, the municipal manager was Mr. Murebi, and the advice which he sought from us was a lease agreement which were to be completed between Zaina Investment and the municipality. Now, Zaina Investment is the company that was established to run or to manage the processing plant, in which the beneficiaries were supposed to have shares. The matter was again referred to Advocate Tira, and she prepared advice to Mr. Muremi, which is attached as Annex C to my affidavit, AJV 27 in the bundle.
So what was what opinion was sought from you?
Basically, whether that agreement which was submitted to the municipal manager to sign was in order.
And what was the agreement about?
That was a lease agreement in terms of which this Zaina company would lease the farm from the municipality.
Yes, and what opinion then did you give Mr. Moremi?
The opinion was that if you look at the MFMA as well as various regulations, that it was simply not achievable. There was a 4% share allocation made to the municipality, but there is no authority in any piece of legislation for a municipality to become a shareholder in a company, unless it's a municipal entity, and there's a lot of other regulations which regulate the establishment of municipal entities and so on. So basically what the opinion indicated was that it is not a viable option. And it concludes at the end indicating that there are other options which should be explored. For instance, it reads in the last paragraph 11, alternatively, we suggest that the municipality make the land available to the Department of Agriculture to build a dairy and to enter into lease agreement with community members. And then Esteana can obtain a piece of land outside the municipal land and build the processing plant. That will not pose any legal challenges to the proposed transaction. We alerted the municipality to the fact that if Esteana is supposed to receive any dividends, which it was, from the proceeds of the processing plant, and that processing plant is established on municipal land, it will be a public-private partnership. And there's quite an intricate and a complicated process for public-private partnerships to be established. And that was why it was indicated that Esteana should get land outside the municipal land.
Thank you. Chair, I'm advised that it's almost 5 o'clock, or is it 5 o'clock? I still need about an hour and a half. I believe if we start at 9:30 tomorrow, I should be done by tea time.
Oh, well, I thought we would be able to finish both witnesses, but obviously we are not able if at 5 o'clock we are not done yet. You say you think you need another hour?
Yes, because there are some contracts that I still need to take, and opinions that I need to take the witness to. Yes. And if we may start early
Are
tomorrow.
you generous or conservative when you say an hour?
I think
Is 30 minutes doable, or it's not doable without doing injustice to the matters?
I don't think it will be doable, Chair.
You don't think it would be
No,
doable?
I don't think it will be doable. 30 minutes is too late.
Okay, no, I asked if we could have the aircon switched on because I was feeling it's hotter. I say it's been switched off, so it's even hotter. I wanted to feel cold, but it's okay because we are adjourning. Or was I the only one feeling hot?
I do as well.
I think somebody's punishing us. Okay, no, we are going to adjourn, but I think we think there would be a challenge starting at 9:30 tomorrow. So let's start at 10 tomorrow.
Yes.
But if necessary, we can also go up to 5 tomorrow. And maybe if need be beyond that, depending.
Yes.
So, but we can discuss in the morning in terms of whether it would be looking like we might need to go beyond 5, but we can go up to 5 if we need to. But obviously, if we finish at 4, it's fine.
Yes.
We'll try and use more time if necessary to try and make as much progress as we can. I think I'm under the impression that Mr. Bashe had asked for that. If I'm mistaken, she will remind me. Okay, Mr. Fender, are you available tomorrow at 10 o'clock?
I've made arrangements to stay over, Chair. I'll be here
Yes,
tomorrow.
okay, no, that's fine. Okay, we are going to adjourn then, and tomorrow we'll start at 10 o'clock. We adjourn.
I was just thinking to myself, if I was here sitting, I'd fall asleep during the
I kept on doing this, but